sound? I do not know. We should have sound. If not, we'll figure it out. Okay. Here we go. Thank you everybody for coming this evening. Welcome to our April 7th Door County Maritime Speaker Series, sponsored by the Door County Medical Center. Appreciate all of you being here this evening on a kind of a gloomy April. Hey, spring showers, right? Mayflowers, that's what I keep telling myself. So tonight, we have a couple members from Northern Sky Theater. Craig Konowalski and Fred Doc Heide. Mike Ray is over there on the sound, for those of you who know Mr. Mike. So with that, I'll turn it over to these two. Hold on. Tech.
I have no idea.
Maybe.
I'm just trying to see if it's on.
No, that mutes it.
Okay, so it's on.
Turn
the red.
In 1884, the first studio-laden landlord put out from Minnesota port bound for the iron foundries of the East. The loading docks in Duluth, Marquette, and Escanaba could pour more than 12,000 tons of ore into the hold of a ship in just a quarter of an hour. And then with the decks nearly awash, the vessel surged out into the wicked chop of the lakes to race their sister ships for the ports along Lake Erie's shores. Come all you bold sailors who follow the lakes, on an iron ore vessel you're living to me. I shipped in Chicago into the shore, bound away for Escanaba and red iron ore. There we down, 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 there we down. The month of September, the 17th day, $2 and a quarter was all they would pay. The wind from the southward sprang up a fresh breeze, and away through Lake Michigan, the Roberts did see. Down, 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 there we down. This package she hauled across the mouth of Green Bay, and before the water she dashed the white spray. We rocked in the same point, our anchor let go. We rode in our canvas and the watchman below. There we down, 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 there we down. They lowered their chutes and like thunder they roared. They spouted into us that red iron ore. We worked like great fellows, our fingers got sore. We cursed Escanaba, that damned iron ore. There we down, 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 there we down. Now finally we were loaded with all she could take, and the tugboat of Troy rode us out in the lake. And then as she left us, we bid her goodbye. We'll meet you in Cleveland next 4th of July. Here we down, 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 there we down, 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 there we down, 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 there we down.
Thank you so much. Good evening and welcome to the Maritime Museum. I am Doc Heide, the co-founder of Northern Sky Theater. And this is my great friend Craig Konowalski, who I've known for 47 years, I think, something like that.
So you're really counting that?
Some of the advertisements for tonight said something about Holly Feldman, who was going to be joining us. Unfortunately, she got called away due to a family emergency, so she's not here tonight, but the two of us can try to handle it instead. And I was doing a little accounting. Craig actually joined the predecessor of Northern Sky Theater 52 years ago, and I joined the predecessor of the Northern Sky Theater 50 years ago, fall of 1972, so that's 102 years of combined experience. Thank you. Almost as long as it takes to get your license at the DMV. So what we have in mind tonight is we're going to do a handful of Great Lakes folk songs. Contrary to popular belief, we actually don't know all that many Great Lakes folk songs. And our most famous show that involves the Great Lakes folk songs is Song of Inland Seas. We'll do some songs from that, but most of the material on that show actually has to do with lumberjacks and farmers and miners and so on. So we'll be doing most of the Great Lakes folk songs from that show, and another song from a newer Northern Sky show. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Northern Sky Theater, give you an opportunity to ask us deep, probing, personal questions. And then we're going to wind up with a sing-along that has to do with the Great Lakes. So that's what we have in mind for tonight.
Gilligan's Island. But anyway, that first song that we did, Red Iron Ore, is a great example of the songs that came from the people who worked and lived around the Great Lakes. And a lot of the songs are about serious subjects. Some are lighter. One is about this fellow who ran aground and thought he was going to die, and instead he just got out and walked to shore. It's not all completely serious. But anyway, so let's see. The Doc, as Doc was saying, we started performing together in 1975. That's the first time. And then going back to the beginning, it was like 1970 before any one of us really performed in the park. It was like 52 years ago. And I don't feel that old.
And you don't look at either. We're going to be doing a song here from Song of Inland Seas. Many of the songs, the authentic Great Lakes folk songs, the ones that were written anonymously, we don't know who wrote them, they were handed down from generation to generation, just people learned them without any kind of written down music. Many of them are rousing, like the one we did to begin. That's an authentic song about the red iron ore people hauling iron from Escanaba. This next one is an authentic song, a ballad that describes a terrible tragedy in the Great Lakes. And there's quite a few of those songs too that are of a sad variety. So Craig is actually going to introduce this with the actual narration from some of the series.
In Upper Lake, Michigan, near the tip of Michigan's Lower Peninsula, lies Beaver Island, long the home port of generations of Great Lakes sailors. Now, many of the inhabitants of the island were Irish, and true to their heritage, they were wonderful singers and ballad makers. Their songs are about many subjects, but some of the most moving are about the tragedies on the lakes.
It was in late October of '73. They left Beaver Harbor and had a calm sea. They were bound for Traverse City, their destination to go. Crossing over Lake Michigan, where the stormy winds blow.
Oh, Johnny, dear son, in the dead of the night, I woke from a dream, and it gave me a fright. And to Traverse City, I beseech you, don't go. For you'll never cross Lake Michigan, where the stormy winds blow.
Father, dear Father, things are not true. I will return shortly and prove it to you. For the Lord will protect me wherever I go. And I'll cross o'er Lake Michigan, where the stormy winds blow. There shall be a wild running before a strong gale, the rudder on the ship, and no report winter sail. And the billows came falling like mountains of snow. They were lost in Lake Michigan, where the stormy winds blow. So I'm thrilled that Craig did the actual narration from that show, which talked about the people of Great Lakes being great singers and ballad makers. Gives me the opportunity to mention one of the great bloopers of all time in Heritage Ensemble history. Someone was supposed to be doing that narration about how people were great singers and ballad makers, and she said, the people of the Great Lakes were great biggers and salad makers.
True story.
And she's now hosting a cooking show in Cleveland.
Why don't you tell us about one of the more modern?
Oh yes, why don't I do that? So those last two songs were actually authentic songs. As I say, authentic means we don't know who wrote them. They were just passed down because they had such beautiful melodies and beautiful lyrics that people remember them without ever writing them down. This next song, on the other hand, is from a fairly recent show. We did it on this guy called Wingjammers. How many of you have seen Wingjammers? Quite a few of you, okay. So you may know that was written by a team of Clay Zambo, who lives out on the East Coast, and Robin Scher, who lives in LA. Fun little side fact here. Robin Scher, who's a brilliant musical theater writer, is the sister of Lisa Scher, who was one of my graduate students at the California School of Professional Psychology. I supervised her dissertation, which was brilliant. And so both the sisters are extremely talented. And Robin wrote, I think, the book and the lyrics for that show, and Clay wrote the music. And they tried to style that show on Song of the Inland Seas, which we mentioned before is the original show we did 52 years ago, and it's been repeated a few times. So they were trying to do something in that vein, and originally they wrote a show that was what we call review, which is to say, like all the Heritage Ensemble shows, they were just a collection of folk songs and narrations. But then Jeff Herbst, our artistic director, encouraged them to write what we call a book musical, which is to say, the shows that you all most like to see, ones that have character and a plot and a conflict, and it all gets resolved, and everyone kisses and gets married at the end. Including that show, actually, which winds up with a marriage.
Sounds like Hallmark to me.
So this is a song that they wrote based on Great Lakes lore, and it describes a number of superstitions that people of the Great Lakes, sailors of the Great Lakes, held to.
I think they're even, well, maybe some of you would know better than us if these, I think these are superstitions that are kind of held worldwide at least. I've heard people in Alaska refer to some of these things. Anyway, I just would like to mention to you that this song is normally done by 3 people in the show. So I'll be doing the work of 3 people. and the orchestra.
Which is quite common if you know Craig Konowalski.
Anyway, this song is called It Just Makes Sense. Lots of things a sailor needs to know, otherwise the journey's cursed. Never cut your hair or nails at sea. Don't put on your luck boot first. Don't throw a bucket overboard. Don't stir your tea with your knife. Never sleep with your head toward the bow, and never go to sail with your wife. All this superstition, all this event, I say it's sailor's wisdom, I say it just makes sense. Never sail a boat that's painted green, otherwise you'll run aground. Never let a preacher or a priest on board, or by God, you'll all be drowned. Don't let a redhead cross your path, not if you value your life. Don't bring flowers or bananas on a boat, and never go to sail with your wife or your girlfriend. Call it superstition, call it a fool's defense. I say sailor's wisdom, I say it just makes sense. Moon says sail on the first Monday in April. That's the day that Kate's new able. Don't says sail on the second day in August. Read it in the Sodom and Gomorrah fable. Don't set sail on the last day of December or any Friday at all. Sunday's good though, all is superstition, all is defense. I said sailor's wisdom, I say it just makes sense. If you want to bring good luck your way, there are things that you can do. Wear a golden earring every day, get a lucky star tattoo. Would you like to see mine? As a family show. One silver coin beneath the mast helps to ward off strife. Pour a glass of wine upon the deck before you sail, and never go to sail with your wife or your girlfriend, or your mother, or your daughter, or your auntie, or your granny, or your all is superstition, all is a fool's defense. I say sailor's wisdom, I say. Don't take a chance, don't push your luck, don't play with fire, don't tease a cat, don't tempt God. It just makes good sense. But never go to sail with a wife.
We got through that. So this next song is one that was collected by Carl Sandberg, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And Craig was going to tell you about that.
Yeah, Carl Sandberg actually, some of you already will probably know this from somewhere along the way, that Carl Sandberg worked part of his career as marine editor of the Milwaukee Journal. And he actually worked at a lot of different jobs, and sometimes a lot of them at the same time. But anyway, this kind of led to him putting together the book called The American Song Bag, which had songs and stories and poetry to it, I believe. And a lot of our material in the early years came from some of those, or at least crossed paths with those same songs and stories. And anyway, when Carl Sandberg was marine editor, he came across this some information about this song. And there's a quote by Carl Sandberg, and that leads into the song called The Bickler. So anyway, Doc, would you give us Carl Sandberg's words, please?
Yes. Carl Sandberg, for your listening enjoyment. I learned this song from an old sea dog who was the marine editor of the Cleveland Plain Dealer about the same time that I was marine editor of the Milwaukee Journal. It's a song of the Great Lakes boatmen in the days when schooners or timber drovers hauled lumber and grain east and then brought manufactured goods back west. It's lusty and gusty with lines like, "Give her sheet and let her boil, the boys will pull her through." And there's spray and wind magic in lines like, "You ought to hear her howling when the wind was blowing free." My boys, if you will listen, I'll sing you a song. So sit you down beside me, I want to take you along. In Milwaukee last October, I chanced to land a bird on the two-corner Bickler, a sail from
The wind come up that night, the boys in blue stiff and strong. As we flew in Michigan, the Bickler plowed along. and far below her foaming bow, dash away she fled, with every stitch canvas and her horse was wagging blue. Oh, it's watch her, it's catch her, it's jump on the tube. Give her a sheet and let her boil, but boys were going through. You ought to hear her howling when the wind was blowing free on the passage down to Buffalo from Milwaukee.
As Gilly and Bottle Shanks, the entrance to the strait, we might have passed a fleet ahead if they hoped to wait. But we swept them all before us, the neatest there you saw, straight out into Lake Huron from the Straits of Mackinac.
I always watched her, it's catch her, and jump on the tube. Give her a sheet and let her boil, the boys will put her through. You ought to hear her howling when the wind was blowing free on the passage down to Buffalo from Milwaukee. That's Gilly and Wobble Shanks, the entrance to the strait. We might have passed the fleet ahead if they'd hoped to wait, but we swept them all before us, the neatest there you saw. They're going to Lake Huron from the Straits of Mackinac. Oh, it's watch her, it's catch her, it's jump on the tube. Here she and let her boil, the boys will pull her through. You want to hear her howling when the wind was blowing free on her passage down the Buffalo from Milwaukee. If you know when past 1.2 in the fresh and free, as the Indian shore we sailed over on our lee. Oh, what's that ahead of us? We knew that we'd be near. It's a light upon the dummy. We are not above the hero. It's watch her, it's catch her, jump on the give her a sheet and let her boil. Boys will put her through. You ought to hear her howling when the wind was blowing free on the passage down to Buffalo from Milwaukee. We're just thrilled that we ended together on that.
You got to hear two of the same verses in that song, which is, if you're trying to memorize it, it's going to be very, very helpful for attending this evening. Well, so at some point, we are going to take a short break from singing for a moment and talk briefly about the history of our theater, which, as we said, is actually 52 years old this year. We didn't have that much opportunity to celebrate our 50th anniversary because there was this little thing called COVID that came along and shut down the theater for a year. So tonight we just wanted to talk for a little about that and give you an opportunity to ask questions, as I said. The original show, well, actually, let me go back even before this. I love to do this, and if Holly Feldman were here tonight, she would want me to do this, I'm sure. We can trace our history as Northern Sky Theater in 4 steps back to the birth of playwriting in America. Believe it or not. I'm not joking about this. There was a guy named George Pierce Baker who taught at Radcliffe and Harvard. He started the first course on playwriting in an American university right at the beginning of the 20th century. And among the students in that class were Thomas Wolfe, who you might have heard of, Eugene O'Neill, who you might have heard of, and a guy you haven't heard of named Alexander Drummond. Nevertheless, Alexander Drummond went off to Cornell and taught a guy named Robert Goddard, who became the preeminent historian of the state of Wisconsin. If you go to any library, you'll see all sorts of books by him. And he set about collecting folklore in Wisconsin. One of his books was called Wisconsin at My Doorstep. And there was a young teacher in the Madison school system named Dave Peterson who saw one of his stories and decided to write a play based on it. And Robert Goddard was really impressed with this and invited him to join this new thing he was starting called Wisconsin Idea Theater. Wisconsin Idea, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is the notion that the boundaries of the university are the boundaries of the state. In other words, we want everyone, all of us, to profit from the knowledge that we gather in our university system here. So they would go around with Wisconsin Idea Theater performing at county parks and state fairs and whatnot in Wisconsin. And Dave wrote a number of shows for this group, including one called Heide. My parents lived in Rylander for some years, and Heide is quite famous up there. He wrote a whole musical about that and a bunch of other shows. Lady Bird Johnson came to see one of them, and some of them toured Europe in the USO. Anyway, Dave was up vacationing in Door County, and he came across this really cool amphitheater near Nicolay Bay that was being used for naturalist programs. And Dave thought it might be a cool spot to actually have kind of a theatrical or musical production. So he was invited to UWGB in January of 1970, I believe, and they did a one-semester course that involved the creation of this new show called Song of the Inland Seas that Dave had been writing with the assistance of someone named Hazel Bookbinder. He had gathered authentic folk songs and put them together with jokes and stories and narration to create this brand new thing, a folk review musical about Wisconsin history, really. And Craig was part of that original cast. And I don't know all the details of that. I understand you performed at Peninsula the first summer and also at Mackinac Island. Is that true?
I don't remember any of it.
And I think Grant was running a sound over here. Michael Lee was also involved in that. The second year, okay. He got involved in that. Anyway, so they started doing the show called Song of the Inland Seas, which originally had a very large cast, I think.
Yeah, originally I had 12 people. It was kind of nice.
That's 12 people.
Yeah.
Right, so when you make a mistake, no one notices, right?
Yeah, really. You could hide a lot. And then actually the first summer that Song of the Inland Seas was done, it was actually done only for 2 weeks at Peninsula Park in 1970. But beyond that, other than that, we did it on Mackinac Island for 3 weeks, which was a wonderful spot. And that was one of the considered locations to put a permanent troupe for a summer. But it just seemed to be a natural fit with the campers and the park and whatnot. So, yeah, and that was about a 7-person group. So whittling down, it's down to 2 now.
So they continued doing shows and actually did that show for 7 years. And I'm thrilled tonight that Mike Ray is here because he gives me the opportunity to tell this personal anecdote. I haven't actually seen Mike in quite a few years, but it just so happens, I don't know if Mike's aware of this, he completely transformed my life. In the summer of 1972, I had a job painting houses in Green Bay. I was a student at UWGB. I was dirt poor. I was living in the basement of one of my friends who was going to college, unfinished basement. I mean, it was like really poverty level, but I was, getting myself through college at UWGB. And I hitchhiked up to Door County to visit a female friend who was camping in Peninsula State Park with her family. And on the way up there, Mike Ray pulled over and gave me a ride. And he said, "We're doing this show tonight at Peninsula State Park. It's called Song of the Inland Seas." And, told me where the amphitheater was and said, you should come and see it. So I went back to the campsite and hung out with my friend and her family. And showtime came around, and we decided, well, maybe we should go check it out. Now, I want to admit here, to be completely honest with you all, I was very skeptical that this was going to be any good. For one thing, I think they were charging 50 cents at the time admission, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been 75, but I think it was 50. And I figured anything that's only 50 cents can't be any good. Even though I couldn't actually afford 50 cents. Because I was a poor college student, that was above my pay, but still I knew it wasn't very much money. I also figured, if they're doing it in a state park, how good could it possibly be? So rather than putting down 50 cents to go to the show, my friend and I snuck in to the right-hand side of the theater. There's, if you've been to the theater, I think, sounds like a lot of you have. On the right-hand side, as you're facing the stage, there's a woods there. And we went and sat in the woods and listened to the show for free. Now, you can't do this anymore because we've now planted poison ivy. Right, just kidding. Anyway, I was completely blown away about how amazing the show was. Mike and Craig, and I don't know who all the Schutzies were involved that year, Mike Vesky. I mean, there were these amazing folks. They were all dressed up in period costumes, and they were amazing instrumentalists and fabulous vocalists. And this was the first time in my life I became aware that there was such a thing as authentic Wisconsin folk music. I had never been exposed to Wisconsin folk music when I was a kid. We heard Red River Valley, I remember, and some Girl Ives stuff. And my mother had a Peter Paul and Mary record, so I knew, Lemon Tree. I mean, but the songs they were singing were ones we were doing tonight, right? And they referenced Milwaukee and Escanaba and places we knew. And they were beautiful melodies, and the lyrics were really intense and interesting. And it was a soul-lifting experience. I just remember being blown away by it and feeling like I was connected to my ancestors in a way I'd never felt before. I was just really affected by it. So I went back to school that fall at UGB. A few months later, I saw a sign advertising for members of the Heritage Ensemble. They needed people who played guitar. And I applied. I've always thought I may have been the only person who actually applied who played the guitar, and that's why I got the job. I don't know if that's true. I got into this group with Maureen Gatsky, who is now running the troupe, and a guy named Dan Shallop, who I'd gone to high school with. Some of you may be familiar with his extremely famous brother, Tony Shalhoub. I don't know how his name, back when we were in high school, they pronounced the name Shallop. And Tony now is, you may know, is the star of Monk, and he's watching Mrs. Maisel on, Amazon. He's in Mrs. Maisel, he plays the father, and so on. He's won Tonys for his performance on Broadway. Anyway, this is his brother Dan, who is also extremely talented, and the three of us went around to Kiwanee Club luncheons and whatever in Northeast Wisconsin, performing lumberjack folk songs of a show that Maureen had written, and I just love this. And so the summer of '73, she invited me to come and be in the summer troupe, and I had the opportunity to actually be in the group that I had so idolized from the woods. And the rest is history. So thank you so much for changing my life. Sincerely. I mean, it was I went off to grad school in clinical psychology, but I kept coming back every summer to be in this group because I loved it so much. And eventually Dave Peterson got back involved and invited me to start writing shows, which was also a real growth experience. And then in 1990, a couple of us who had been involved in the theater, Fred Alley and Gerald Pellrine and myself, inherited the theater from Dave Peterson. He decided to retire as a professor, and because we had been so ardent, we inherited the theater, and we changed the name to American Folklore Theater, which in retrospect, I wish we hadn't named it that, because it turned out that wasn't really what we ended up doing. But at the time, we thought we would be continuing kind of in the Heritage Ensemble vein. But right away, Fred Alley started writing book musicals. And before you knew it, it turned out that those were extremely popular. And people would rather see an original book musical than they would these historically based folk music-based shows. And so all that took off. And he immediately brought his friend Jeff Herbst into the theater. And you probably know Jeff. They met at a pool in Motorhead, Wisconsin, and they were like 12 years old or something. They were both kids hanging out in the pool, and they both went to school down there. And by this point, Jeff had actually gone off to New York to be an actor, and he had played the lead role in a Broadway musical. And Fred said, I've got this good friend Jeff, and we should get him involved in the theater. And I said, sure. So Jeff joined, and then it's just taken off from there, as I imagine you're all familiar with. So that's kind of the early history of the theater. Does anyone have any questions about Golden Sky or American Folklore Theater or Heritage Ensemble?
Could you repeat that? Oh, somebody's got a question.
What precipitated the name change to Golden Sky? What was the rationale?
Well, it's a very good question, thank you. There were a number of reasons for that. One big one was we were increasingly trying to find writers. How many of you have been to see Golden Sky show, by the way? Maybe I should ask in reverse. How many of you have never been to Golden Sky? Okay, please come. So
It was me. It was me.
So you're all familiar with how amazing this place is, and I just feel honored to be associated with it. What precipitated the name changes, Fred Alley passed away in 2001. Some of you probably are familiar with this. After putting in a solid decade of writing shows for us, performing with us, helping launch the theater, Fred had just won the Richard Rogers Award for having written the best new musical in America, which is a show called Spitfire Girl, based on the movie Spitfire Girl. He and James Falk, who lived in Sturgeon Bay up to a few months ago, had written the show, and they entered into the contest, and so they won this award. So Fred was due to fly to New York City to receive a check for $100,000 from Stephen Sondheim to produce this show off Broadway. And he was taking an evening jog near the home that he and I and his brother lived in together outside of Dover's Harbor, and he had a undiagnosed heart condition and died. And they discovered him the next morning. So, so Fred had been one of our, I mean, that was a huge thing to recover from the loss of Fred Alley. Some of us, like me and Jeff, were very close friends with him, but those of you who saw him knew his incredible ability. Fred could easily have gone to Broadway and become a lead on Broadway. He had that quality voice and that quality acting. And he chose instead to stay here and help us develop this little park theater company because he fell in love with it too, and the really unique thing that Golden Sky is. Anyway, this is all answering your question about that. So when Fred died in 2001, we lost one of our principal writers. And now Jeff, as our artistic director, had to find new writers. And when he would go to conferences, he was finding it very difficult to get people to write for something called American Folklore Theater, because they assumed what we were doing was heritage ensemble style shows. And in fact, since we just did a song from Wingjammers, this is an appropriate point to point out that, you know, those folks, Clay and Robin, originally thought that's what we wanted would be, you know, some sort of folk music review on the Great Lakes, because American Folklore Theater sounded like that's what they would be doing. And Jeff had to explain, no, we're not doing that kind of stuff so much anymore. And quite truthfully, the reason we don't do those shows so much anymore is economics. What we found over the years is our audiences would vastly prefer to see shows that had plots and characters. So we've migrated in that direction. And so that was one big reason that we did it. It just didn't really represent us to the outside world, and we were increasingly becoming a national organization. So this summer, for example, one of our two new shows is Love Stings, and it's being created by a team from Los Angeles and Arizona, for example. So we can't do that if, you know, we sound like some ridiculous little folk group in Wisconsin. So, yes.
So, do you have a favorite show?
A favorite show?
It's like a favorite child.
Well, that's a complicated question because I write shows. So I'm somewhat prejudiced. And it's a little hard to step outside that. So probably my personal favorite show from that standpoint, from the standpoint of being in a show, would be Belgius in Heaven, which was the first book musical I wrote back in 1994, and it's been produced 10 times or something. And it was so successful that my writing partner Lee Becker and I are writing a prequel to that show. It's called Hell's Belgius. And we've been working on that show for 12 years, which sounds like a long time, but the truth is we only worked on it 2 weeks a year because I live in California. Lee lives with his family in North Carolina, and he'd come out to California for 2 weeks every year. We would work feverishly for 2 weeks and send in a new script, and the team would say no. Go back, work another year. So this summer we're actually having a workshop of that show. I'm thrilled to say after 12 years, it's gotten to the point where our team, which has very high standards, but appropriate standards, has agreed that it's ready to move to what we call a workshop. And a workshop means you get actors together for a week and you practice on the music and you try to see if the show works on its feet, and then you have a reading at the end of the week. So that's a reading. I don't think this is public knowledge yet, so I probably shouldn't announce it, but it's going to be happening this summer. You can keep your eyes out for that. So that's probably my favorite show because I got to be in it opposite Fred and opposite Jeff, and if you've seen that show, you know they were both brilliant in it. Lee plays Mildred, the talking chicken, in that show. If that sounds like a bizarre idea, come and see the show and you'll see how that works. And Lee is amazing at that. So it's an incredible experience to be in it. If I had to pick a show that I just enjoyed watching from the audience, in terms of my favorites, some of my favorites are actually Wingjammers and Maritime. I think those are both great shows. And those are two of our more serious shows. But Lumberjacks in Love, of course, is an all-time favorite for many of us. Other questions? Yes?
How is your schedule this year different than it was pre-COVID?
Oh, how is our schedule this year different from pre-COVID? Well, for one thing, we're only doing 2 shows in rep outdoors, and as you probably know, we were getting up to doing 3 or 4 different shows prior to COVID, and that just becomes impossible with all the extra stuff that's going on with COVID, as well as the fact that we now have a new indoor theater, as you're probably aware, the Gold Theater, and now we need to have crews to work both the indoor theater and the outdoor theater. So theater involves more than just people you see on stage. There's also people running the lights and running the sound and coordinating the volunteers and parking people in the parking lot, all that kind of stuff. So doing business, business managers are that. At any rate, so it's hard to do, and hopefully at some point we might get back to that, but for the moment we're trying to do a simpler schedule. We're only having 1 show a night at the park, and we were up to 8 shows a week in the park. We had a 6 o'clock and an 8:30 show twice a week. We're not doing that because again, it's just too. We are a member of Actors Equity, which is the actors union. They have a lot of regulations on what you can do as a theater, and some of those regulations involve stuff like the actors can't interact with the audience and so on, which we love to do, but this year we can't. So anyway, we're having to modify for those reasons. But we are doing 2 outdoor shows, and then we're bringing back Dad Season tickets indoors. That was a sellout hit when we did it right before COVID hit. And then it went down to Milwaukee Rep and was a smash hit down there, so we're bringing that back in the summer. And then in the fall, we have a brand new show called Sunflower, which is being put together by a brand new team, spearheaded by Chris Granberry, that some of you might have seen on our stage in the last few years. And that's going to be a delightful, warm-hearted show about a bunch of friends going on a camping trip to do a comedy together. Other questions? Paige.
Let's talk about the song that Northern Sky wrote for the museum.
Excuse me?
You know the song that Lee wrote for the museum?
The song that we wrote for the museum. Oh, yes. Yes. I don't know if that's on your website. Is
It's
it?
on our YouTube channel.
On your YouTube channel? Yeah, if you want to see the impressive writing skills of my writing partner, Lee Becker, that'd be a good way to do it. When he took a famous song, I don't know, it might have been the Bigler, I can't remember, a famous tune, and wrote new words to it about the museum and put it together with really cool graphics of shipwrecks and so on. It's a great video, so if you haven't seen that, I'd highly recommend it. It's been a great pleasure over the years to work with Lee. He's just he's a brilliant improvisational comedian and a super interesting and deep guy. And we've been best friends ever since Fred Alley imported him from New York. This is another bizarre little story. Quite a few people in the history of our theater grew up together in Mount Horeb, or at least came from Mount Horeb. I mentioned Fred and Jeff. Lee also was from Mount Horeb. Dan Clare was from Mount Horeb. There might be even some other people. Anyway, Lee had gone out to New York and was in a Shakespeare production. Fred was out in New York working on a show with James Falk called The Passage. And he happened to go see this Shakespeare production that Lee was in. We needed someone to play the talking chicken in the brand new Buildings in Heaven that I was just writing. This is a really, you pretty much have to see the show or else this doesn't make any sense to describe it, but this is a technique we learned from the great Paul Sills. We were very privileged to work with Paul Sills, who was the founding director of the Second City Theater, which I'm managing you've heard of the Second City. Stephen Colbert, Tina Fey, entire generation, Bill Murray, all these people came through Second City. Paul was one of the founders of that. He personally trained Alan Alda from MASH, Alan Arkin, folks like this. At any rate, we worked with Paul, and he taught us this really cool technique where you can have an actor on a microphone voicing a character, and the other people on stage interact with the character as if it's real. So, exactly. So if someone's pitting a chicken while someone's voicing the chicken on the mic,
I'm not good at being those.
pretty soon the audience sees the chicken. It's a really fun technique. Anyway, so we played the voice of the chicken. And that's a lot harder to do than you might think. An entire range of foul emotion, so to speak. And that was a foul pun. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
How much songs did you write?
Two.
How many songs did you write?
How many songs
Have you written?
have I written? Gosh.
Tell them about
I
the
bet
summer.
you might think I planned to do, but I did not. Actually, we had never met prior to this evening. It just so happens I'm coming up with a song this summer. I'm turning 70 years old this summer, which is, oh boy. And it looks like maybe a few of you know the pleasure of having done that yourselves. At any rate, because we just had a brand new grandchild, our first grandchild, it occurred to me that by the time she's fully grown, it's possible I'm no longer going to be quite as active as a folk singer. And I wanted her to be aware of the kind of work I was doing. So I'm creating a songbook of the stuff I've written. And we have close to 60 songs in that book. And those are songs that are not for musical comedies. I've also written 20 shows. But most of the songs in the book are just things I wrote for the fun of it as a singer-songwriter. And this book is called Tangled in Wonder. And it's going to be released this summer. And if it's appropriate to mention this, we're having a big concert at the Door Community Auditorium on July 24th to celebrate that release. And 15 of my brilliant vocalist friends are coming from all over the country. Craig Konowalski is performing that night. Steve Kaler and who else do we have? Eric Lewis, Karen Wall, Matt Sandberg, on and on and on. Chris Granberry are all going to be singing these songs at that event at the DC on July 24th. So that's going to be a birthday party. You're all invited. My wife is insisting that there be a free cupcake for everyone there. Well, I would take one more question if we have one, or otherwise we will go to our sing-along. Any other questions? If not,
I have one.
yes.
Will I ever get my 50 cents?
let's see. You can hang back the other half of the show.
The other half is for the ride.
Oh, that's right, the other half is for the ride. This was the day before Uber with my friend.
All right. Well, gosh, you people have been a wonderful audience and really appreciate a chance to get to sing in front of a great crowd like you folks. Thanks for being so kind to us. And as Doc and I were saying before, we've done that Song of the LNC show hundreds of times, but never together. Well, only one summer we did, but that was only 22 years ago. It's counting. So anyway, we'd like to have you sing along on this song, but I just wanted to tell you that this song is about water pollution. And I just want to mention one story that always sticks in my mind is when I was about 10 years old, I went for a boat ride with my best friends and their parents on the Fox River. And so we came in from the bay, we went up the Fox River, and we got about as far as where the East River runs into the Fox River, and the river turned pink. It was completely pink. And that was the color tissue that they were making that day in the paper mills. And the upside of that is it smelled wonderful. All the perfume and stuff they had in it. So, but anyway, but things have gotten better, and I know that a lot of you probably know about the book that's called The Death and Life of the Great Lakes. It was the Door County Reed's book about 5 years ago. It's a wonderful book, and it's got a lot of detail in it, but it's so wonderfully written. It's fun to read. It talks about all the challenges the Great Lakes have had since prehistoric times and how things have evolved, what man has done to try and correct things, and how some things worked, some things changed, and it's a constant battle to try to keep things on a good side of the for the ecology. And then tourism and the commerce of the lakes is something that has to be balanced with that. So it's not an easy thing to do, but we've made a lot of progress. But anyway, I just I was gonna. I don't know if you want to do that, but I think we got to keep going we got to keep working on that for a long time. And so even though it's better, still don't want to go and take a glass and dip it in the Fox River. But we're good. But you can do your parts right now. All you have to do is sing. And I'm going to ask you to do just this simple little chorus part with us, and we'll do all the rest of the heavy lifting on the verses. But anyway, here's how the chorus goes. Water pollution, water pollution. Water pollution wastes me money and it makes me throw up. Now, I was talking to Paige before, and she said that she would appreciate it if you didn't actually throw up. So, but sing as loud as you can. Can we try it once and just have a little fun with it? Here we go. Water pollution, sing a little louder. Water pollution, sing a little louder. Water pollution, it wastes me money and it makes me throw up. Very good, very good. We don't even need a second rehearsal for this. Heavens above, as everyone knows, our H2O don't smell like no nose. We all agree there's plenty of slime, but no one knows the guilty of the crime. For water is far from a perfect solution, and we may have a problem called water pollution. Everybody! Water pollution. Sing out the chorus. Water pollution. Let them hear you, it's your boy again. Water pollution. It wastes me money and makes me grow up. Very good, everybody. The purest of water is using our beer, and no one believes they got it from here. Our water may look the color of booze, but who would dare that awful news. Our water is far from a perfect solution. And we may have a problem called water pollution. Everybody! Water pollution. Water pollution. Can't see the fish now. Water pollution. It wastes me money and it makes me grow up. Oh yeah. Pretty good girl. You might want to audition a few of these people. And now where can the answer be found? Just seems like the arguments go round and round. We must find a way and act in haste. Throw a view up to our glasses in the waste. For water is far from a perfect solution. Or at least can agree, though tentatively, that in stream or lake there's a chance you take. Keep your mouth shut tight, cause the chance is slight that the water is pure, and we think we're sure that our water is far from a perfect solution. We may have a problem called water pollution. It's your last chance now. Water pollution. Spit in the sewage. Water pollution. Put it on your toothbrush. Water pollution. It wastes me money and makes me grow up. Thank you all. Thank you all for being such a great